You've probably stood in line at one, waited 15 minutes for a taco or a burger, paid almost the same price you'd pay at a sit-down restaurant, and thought nothing of it. Most people assume a food truck is just a restaurant that couldn't afford 4 walls. A smaller version of the real thing. Cheaper to start, cheaper to run, and eventually, if it does well enough, it grows up into an actual building with tables and a sign out front. That assumption is almost completely wrong. A food truck isn't a stripped-down restaurant. It's a completely different business wearing the same disguise. The kitchen equipment, the menu boards, the smell of grilling onions, all of it looks like a restaurant. But underneath, the entire model runs on a different currency. Restaurants sell food and seating. Food trucks sell something much stranger, controlled scarcity in motion. To understand what that means, you have to start with the one number every food truck owner obsesses over more than any other, not the cost of ingredients, not even rent, because most days there is no rent at all. The number that decides whether a truck lives or dies is called covers per hour, and it means exactly what it sounds like. How many people can you physically serve food to in 60 minutes? A restaurant with 50 seats can serve 50 people who all sit down slowly, order drinks, linger over dessert, and leave whenever they feel like it. A food truck has no seats. It has a service window roughly the width of a large television screen, and behind that window, usually 2 to 4 people crammed into a space smaller than most home kitchens. Every single customer has to be taken, cooked, and handed their food through that one narrow opening. There is no second window. There is no expanding the kitchen when a line forms. The bottleneck is fixed the moment the truck is built. This is where the first hidden truth of the business appears. A food truck owner isn't really selling tacos or burgers or noodles. They're selling throughput. Speed is the product. And that single constraint, the width of one window, and the number of hands behind it, quietly determines almost everything else about how the business behaves. Think about why food truck menus are so short. 4 or 5 items, sometimes fewer. It looks like simplicity for its own sake, a nice, minimalist brand choice. It isn't. A short menu is a mechanical necessity. Every extra dish you add doesn't just add work. It adds decision-making time to every single customer in line, and it adds prep complexity to a kitchen with no room to store 15 different proteins and sauces. A 20-item menu inside a food truck doesn't create more sales. It creates a longer line, more confused customers, and a kitchen collapsing under its own choices. Restaurants can absorb that complexity because they have space and seated customers who don't mind waiting. Food trucks can't. Every menu decision is really a speed decision wearing a chef's hat. Now here's where the psychology starts working in the owner's favor, whether they planned it that way or not. A short line outside a food truck looks unpopular. A long line looks irresistible. Humans are wired to trust a crowd's judgment more than their own. A bias psychologists call social proof, and nothing manufactures social proof faster than the visible physical bottleneck of that one small service window. A restaurant with an empty dining room can still convince you the food is good. An empty food truck cannot hide the same way. But the moment that line stretches around the block, people stop asking whether the food is worth the wait. They assume it must be, because look how many people are already convinced. That's not a marketing trick the owner had to pay for. It's a byproduct of the exact same constraint that limits how fast they can cook. But speed only matters if there's somewhere to put it to use. And this brings us to the part of the business that almost nobody outside the industry thinks about. Food trucks don't really compete on food. They compete on location. And location for a food truck is nothing like location for a restaurant. A restaurant signs a lease. It picks one spot, usually for years, and everything about the business, staffing, supply deliveries, even the parking for customers, gets built around that single fixed address. A food truck owner has to solve the opposite problem every single day. Where do I park today? Where will the most hungry people with the least patience walk past me in the next 4 hours? That decision gets made constantly, sometimes multiple times a week, sometimes multiple times a day. This is why the real skill in running a food truck isn't cooking. It's reading a city like a tide chart. Lunch crowds outside office buildings between 11:30 and 1, breweries and bars on weekend nights, festivals, farmers markets, private events, college campuses during the school year, and dead during the summer. A great food truck owner is quietly running a logistics operation, constantly moving inventory, in this case, people's stomachs, toward wherever demand happens to be concentrated in that exact window of time. And this is where the hidden cost most new owners never see coming enters the picture: permits. Every city treats food trucks differently, and in most major cities, the permit system is deliberately restrictive because brick-and-mortar restaurants lobby hard to keep mobile competitors away from their front doors. Some cities require trucks to park a certain distance from any existing restaurant. Others cap the total number of mobile vendor permits issued citywide, turning a permit into something closer to a taxi medallion, a scarce asset that can be worth thousands of dollars simply because so few exist. In places like these, an owner isn't really paying for the right to sell food. They're paying for legal access to foot traffic in specific locations at specific hours. That access is the actual product being purchased, long before a single burger gets flipped. This explains something that confuses a lot of aspiring owners when they first do the math. A used food truck, fully equipped, might cost $40,000 to $80,000. That sounds like the big expense. But in cities with restrictive permitting, owners routinely spend just as much, sometimes more, on securing legal parking rights in the handful of locations where the lunch crowd actually exists. You can own the best truck in the city and still fail, simply because you were never allowed to park it where the money was. Now put yourself inside the mind of a customer, standing at that window for a moment, because the psychology here is just as important as the mechanics. Scarcity does something specific to human decision-making. When people believe an opportunity is limited, whether that's limited time, limited stock, or a limited chance to catch the truck before it moves on, they place a higher value on it almost automatically. Economists call this the scarcity heuristic, and food trucks are practically engineered to trigger it, even when nobody designed them with psychology in mind. The truck won't be here tomorrow. The kitchen might sell out of the popular item by 1 o'clock. If you don't order now, you might not get another chance for weeks. None of this is manipulation in the deceptive sense. It's simply true. But true scarcity is far more persuasive than manufactured scarcity, and food trucks have it built into their DNA because they physically cannot stay in one place and serve unlimited customers the way a restaurant can. This is also why food truck customers tolerate prices that would seem high for the same item sold from a building. A restaurant selling an $8 taco competes against every other $8 taco in a 5-mile radius, visible on a map, reviewed online, compared side by side. A food truck selling that same taco right now, at this specific festival, outside this specific office building, isn't really competing with anything. In this moment, it's the only taco available. Location scarcity quietly removes price comparison from the customer's mind, and that's worth more to the owner's margins than almost any other factor in the business. Which brings us to the number that actually decides whether any of this works: the margin on each item sold. Food trucks are often assumed to be a cheap way into the restaurant business, and in terms of starting equipment, that's roughly true. But the ongoing economics are brutal in a way most new owners underestimate. Fuel for the truck itself, and for the generator running the kitchen equipment. Commissary kitchen fees? Because most cities require trucks to prep food and dispose of waste at a licensed commercial kitchen overnight, which means paying rent on a second invisible kitchen nobody ever sees. Insurance that runs higher than a stationary restaurant because a moving vehicle carrying propane tanks and hot oil is a genuinely different risk profile to underwriters. And staffing 2 to 4 people who have to work in a space roughly the size of a large closet for hours at a time in heat that regularly climbs past 100 degrees near the grills. All of that has to be covered before a single dollar becomes profit, and it all has to be covered inside a service window that might only be open for 4 or 5 productive hours a day. A restaurant spreads its fixed costs across breakfast, lunch, dinner, and late night. A food truck often gets one real shot at volume, and if the weather turns bad, or the chosen spot underperforms, or a competing truck parks nearby that same day, there's no second shift to make up the difference. The entire day's economics can hinge on a handful of hours nobody can fully predict in advance. This is the real reason so many food trucks quietly disappear within their first 2 years. And it's rarely because the food was bad. It's because the owner was, in effect, running 3 overlapping businesses at once: a kitchen, a moving logistics operation, and a real estate negotiation with the city, while only having the training and passion for one of them, the cooking. The truck itself is almost the easiest part to get right. Everything surrounding it is where the business actually lives or dies. And this is what makes the successful ones so interesting to study. The food trucks that grow into empires, the ones that eventually open a permanent restaurant or expand into a small fleet of trucks or license their brand to other operators, didn't win because they had the best recipe in the city. They won because they solved the logistics problem better than everyone else parked nearby. They learned exactly which corner produces a line by 11:40, exactly which neighborhood empties out by 1, exactly which festival organizer to call back first before the good spots get claimed by someone else. The food got them noticed. The location strategy is what actually built the business, which brings the whole story back to where it started. You always thought a food truck sells food. In the most basic sense, of course it does. But strip away the menu, the recipes, the branding painted across the side panel, and what's left is a business built entirely around solving one constantly shifting puzzle. How do you take a kitchen small enough to fit on a trailer and put it in exactly the right place, at exactly the right hour, in front of exactly the people hungry enough and short on time enough to stand in a line for something they could technically get somewhere else, slower and for less urgency? That's not a smaller restaurant. That's an entirely different kind of business, disguised behind a service window, a short menu, and the smell of something delicious drifting down the street at exactly the moment you happen to walk by.